When did you and the men spray the chemicals, and what were you spraying them on?
We were spraying them on Parkinsonia, which is a woody tree. We sprayed them through the Fitzroy Valley, 45-degree heat, and I sprayed there between 1975 and 1985.
And can you tell me how the backpacks would leak and the men would be drenched in this stuff? Can you talk about that?
Well, we used these old steel backpacks, and they leaked all over everybody's back and down their backside, down their legs, and there was no ablution facilities at all, daytime or nighttime.
So after a while, what happened to the men?
Well, I can only say that, you know, everybody, there's a universal thing, they all got rashes, everybody got rashes, headaches, and I guess internal bleeding was another pretty universal thing, like they were vomiting blood and passing blood. Those three things, and then on top of that there was probably a whole lot of a raft of other symptoms.
Were you and the men ever given any protective clothing or safety training?
No, not in the beginning. We never had any throughout the whole time, really. No meaningful training or safety gear, nothing. And I came from a background that had nothing to do with what I was doing then. You know, I came from a retail background, straight into spraying chemicals with no training at all.
And tell me what you'd be wearing when you're spraying those chemicals.
Well, most of the people would be wearing what was appropriate for the heat, which would be shorts and thongs and t-shirts, you know. And very rarely you'd see people in long trousers. Some people have boots on as a preference, you know, but mainly just shorts and t-shirts.
Now, in the beginning, what were you told about the chemicals? How safe were they?
Harmless. So harmless you could drink it.
That's what they told you?
That's right.
Who told you that?
Oh, all the bosses, all the head sharangs.
If the men had have known how dangerous the chemicals were, do you think they would have still sprayed them?
Yeah, well, it's difficult to understand how bad they were, even from now, from the point of view, even from now, you know, like no one really understood, especially working for the government, you know, you think the government's not going to hand you stuff that basically we're convinced it was dumped toxic waste from Vietnam.
Now, Carl, you wrote many letters, didn't you, to your bosses, complaining. Can you talk about that?
I approached them personally and complained about it over and over again. I wrote letters to them as well, not so many letters, but mainly verbal complaints, outlining what was happening to the men, you know. And I also went and saw medical authorities and complained there as well, but everyone assured me that it was harmless.
But you were seeing the evidence that it wasn't.
It definitely wasn't harmless. I could see, you can see cause and result, you know, cause and effect. And the cause was very evident and the effect was very evident, you know. You don't need to be a scientist to see that cause and effects, you know. You don't need to go to university to see cause and effect.
Now, why do you think a lot of the men just continued to spray even though they were sick?
Well, it was very difficult to 100% attribute what was happening, because, you know, like when I first started, my hair fell out and I had blisters and so forth. I thought, coming from a retail background, it was probably a change of diet and a different acclimatisation, you know, in the Kimberley, you know. And, you know, you like your job and you're told that the stuff's harmless, so you think, well, you know, I'm probably wrong, so you give them the benefit of the doubt, you know. And that was a mistake to trust the government, you know.
The letter that you got back from one of the managers said the chemicals were safe and they didn't appreciate you doing your own research. What were they talking about?
Well, they just told us basically to get on with using it and don't complain, you know, whether it's causing any problems or not. They didn't really care. It was a fairly throwaway remark, really, and fairly callous remark, I would say, you know, like to say that, you know, without investigating. They had a responsibility to the workers to investigate any complaint, and that wasn't done.
Now, can you talk about how the drums arrived, how much arrived, and what sort of labels are on the drums?
Well, first off, we got about 20-litre drums, 4-gallon drums, clearly labelled, clearly contents marked on the drums, use instructions, that sort of stuff. Then all of a sudden, at least 30 44-gallon drums of concentrate arrived, and it was completely different to the stuff in the 20-litre drums. The stuff in the 20-litre drums was like engine oil or honey, colour. And the next lot came, it was black and thick, and it blocked up all the nozzles. And 30 drums was enough for at least 20 years. And that's not government policy to buy. They budget for what they do for every year, and it's not government policy to buy 20 years stuff.
So where do you think those drums came from?
I think they came from Vietnam, or destined for Vietnam, and it was deemed too toxic to use in Vietnam in about 1973, and they had a surplus pile of the stuff that they needed to get rid of, and I'm convinced 100% that it was dumped on us.
How bad did it eventually get for the men?
As bad as it can get. Suicide, and so ill they couldn't function. And it's very difficult to describe how bad it was for families who had no explanations, and they still haven't got any explanations. They're still, the government have said they're sorry, but what does sorry mean when it's throwaway stuff they're saying? They're using people like disposable workers. The workers were just disposable. Yeah.
Cyril Hunter was a close friend,
Yeah.
and a sprayer. How fit and healthy was Cyril Hunter before he started spraying those chemicals?
We were pretty well all fit and healthy. They were all. That's the sad part about it. All the blokes that worked there were all working people. They weren't bludgers. They all loved their job, and he was no exception. He was as fit as a mallee bull. He could throw a full 44-gallon drum of diesel on the back of a truck. He went from that to an invalid who still wanted to go to work, even though I personally told him, don't come to work, you're too ill. And I said, if you keep using that stuff, it'll kill you. And of course he kept using it, but he was a very proud man who wanted to work, and he kept working until he dropped dead.
Tell me the symptoms that you saw in Cyril.
I saw a gradual decline in his health. His arms his black arms were dyed white or bleached white, with where that poison came in contact. He had great big lumps under his jaw from his glands, under his arms, and he told me in his groin. His general health was so bad that he couldn't get up the stairs at work to get his pay. He was sitting down the bottom there, waiting for the blokes to go and get his pay. I said, what's wrong with you? I'm too crook to get up the stairs, mate, And I said, well, you shouldn't be at work. I've told you to take sick leave. But no, he wanted to stay at work.
And how old was Cyril?
He was in his early 30s then. He was probably about 30, and he should have been in the prime of his life. And he'd been in the prime of his life until he started working for us, He was a classic example of what happened to the blokes. An extreme example.
So 30 years later, his remains are still sitting in a government laboratory and they haven't been tested.
In a government laboratory in long-term storage in Welshpool, and they haven't been tested, and there's been one pathetic excuse after another. It's my opinion that it's because they will find 2,4,5-T and 2,4-D in his remains, and that will conclusively prove everything that we've been claiming for the last 30 years.
The wives and partners of the men also were exposed to the chemicals. What's happened to some of those women?
A lot of them have had cancers, and some have died of cancers. And they probably inadvertently were exposed to the same stuff unknowingly. That would be my cynical view. They probably didn't know. They probably drank the stuff out of the water.
Can you talk about how the women were exposed to the chemicals?
Well, the women would have been exposed through washing clothes and riding in contaminated vehicles. And those vehicles, if you park them in your garden, they would kill your garden just from the fumes. And
Did you see that happen?
Yes, I saw that happen. Yeah, all Cyril's mother's garden died as a result of him parking his Land Rover in the garden. But also, some of them would have gone in the shed. My wife went in the shed and came to the storage place where we used to keep the stuff. Yeah, so various ways they were exposed.
There's reports of a second wave of people getting sick, not just the wives, but the children of the sprayers. Can you talk about that?
Well, it seems to be more than coincidence that so many of the children are suffering known effects. So it's anyone's guess what's happened, but I'd say it's gone, my view is it's gone down through the generations of the workers. And this is something why the government don't want to be involved in any compensation, because where's it going to end? It's a Pandora's box.
Can you describe some of the illnesses you've had as a result, you believe, of this chemical exposure? What sort of conditions have you had?
Well, first of all, my hair started to fall out and I got rashes and severe boils, severe headaches. And blokes don't normally go around talking to each other about what's happened, you know. And I started vomiting blood and passing blood, and I didn't find out till years later that all the other blokes were doing the same type of thing, you know. And then I had like constant heart attacks, unconscious. They told my wife I was going to die over and over again. 5 black spots on my lungs. I've used cortisone cream for rashes that's ruined my bones. I need hip replacements. That's just off the top of my head, and there's 5 volumes of medical notes at Derby Regional Hospital that back up what I'm saying.
All these years later, how many men have been compensated?
As far as I know, very small handful, and I don't think there's, as far as I know, there's none been compensated from the West Kimberley where all of this originated. They come from other regions, the people that have been compensated. That's the best of my knowledge. They know full well what's happened, but when it becomes, they apologise. I've got letters from every politician for the last 20 years saying they're sorry about what's happened. They acknowledge what's happened. But when it becomes to a workers' compensation case, it becomes the other way around. They sit on the fence, they procrastinate. Basically what they're doing and what they have done, and they've done it very successfully, they're waited for people to die, and that's their way of addressing it, is to just wait till everyone dies and then there's not a problem anymore.
What's it been like watching your mates die? Can you talk a bit about that?
Oh, it's no good. It's bad. And yeah, watching people dying, and the part that's very touching or bad is that that they don't really know, well, they haven't had any recognition of why they're dying, you know, and they're dying wondering why, you know, and they want some answers. And they die with that sort of, I don't know, that lingering question mark hanging over, why has this happened to me, you know? And to see that is terrible. And the effect it's had on their families, their wives. Some of their wives have left them because they're too sick. They've lost their children. Terrible, terrible, shocking.
Do people often not understand?
That's another thing, is the ignorance of people that you have contact with from day to day. They don't see what we have seen, and they can't empathise because they've never seen what's happened. Yeah, some people think you're just too lazy to work, you know, and putting it on, like a bit like the Vietnam veterans, you know, they're just putting their hand out to try and get some money for nothing, you know. That's there's a certain amount of cynicism of people not believing what's happened, you know, and for the government to dump this stuff is difficult to believe. That's understandably difficult to believe that the government would dump toxic waste on workers, however remote a spot or wherever in Australia. You wouldn't think that the stuff would have been brought into Australia in the first place. And we know that it was brought into Australia because it's all documented. And there's no denying what's happened, you know. It's just that it's not widely known or widely acknowledged. And basically that's one of the reasons I'm doing the interview now, is to let everybody know what's happened.